Hello, in this video I want to take a look at the Tableau Metadata API. The Tableau Metadata API is a fairly new API. It was released at the back end of 2019. And in this video I want to take a quick look at what this API is, what you can do with it. We're going to talk about a thing called GraphQL, and we're going to see how we can connect to the API and get some data out of it. So first of all, I'm here on the documentation page of the Metadata API, which can be found on the help section of the main Tableau website. And here it says what we can do with the Tableau Metadata API. First of all, it's part of the Tableau catalog, and the Tableau catalog is, it's part of the data management add-on. Now you can use the Metadata API without having purchased the data management add-on. So you can just use the Metadata API as you want it. You don't get a catalog, of course. The catalog is powered by this Metadata API. And what this Metadata API allows you to do is, as the documentation says, it allows you to discover data. It allows you to track a lineage, so the relationship between different assets, workbooks on your server. For example, here it says identify which workbooks use a specific published data source, so get a better overview of what is being used where. And also impact analysis. Now, impact analysis is an interesting one because what you could potentially do is, for example, if you remove a calculation from a published data source, which workbooks will be impacted by that deletion. Or you could even go as far as filtering to all the calculations that contain user filters, and then you can see like, oh, what's gonna change if we make some or if we delete something here. So that's kind of interesting. So you get discover the data, track lineage, and perform impact analysis. Now we have different types of metadata in Tableau. So we have let me see. We have some more information there as well. So we have Tableau data. There we go. Yeah, so we have general Tableau content. So that means data sources, workbooks, sheets. So all kinds of things that you kind of use in Tableau desktop and which you publish to Tableau server. But then we also have Tableau online and specific content. So this goes around the number of sites that you have in a server, the projects that live within those sites, users that are on the server, which users own which workbooks, for example, but also things like the data quality warnings and messages. Now, you probably think, hey, I can get some of these also through the Postgres database, which is correct. The Postgres database, however, doesn't give you all of this. On top of that, the Postgres database is a database, so that means that you need to do sometimes fairly complex joins between tables and multiple joins between multiple tables in order to get to the information that you're interested in. Now, the third type of content that we have in the Metadata API is external assets. And those external assets are, for example, your databases, so the connections to those databases, but also web data connectors. Also, you can query for tables within those databases. Okay, so what is interesting about this new Metadata API, and I mentioned it in the introduction, is that it uses a thing called GraphQL. Now, if you've used Tableau's REST API, Tableau's REST API has lots and lots of what we call endpoints. And these endpoints allow you to perform certain tasks like query users on the server, delete a user, find a workbook. And those are all individual queries you send to the API. Now, what you can do with GraphQL, and GraphQL is a query language, and it was built by the team at Facebook, and it's an open source query language. It allows you to actually describe the data that you want, and you then exactly get that data back. And how you write that data and the actual request is in JSON. So here we can see in the main GraphQL website is that on the second tab here, ask for what you want. And we want, in this case, this is from the website of GraphQL, we want the tagline. Now the tagline we can see here, a query language for your API. Now we get that exactly how we specified we get the data back. So that is really useful because you ask for the data and you know exactly how you're getting it back because you specify it. Whilst with REST APIs, you often need to read lots of documentation and need to understand how the data is being returned to you. Also, what we know with GraphQL is that the data comes back in a JSON format, which is fairly easy to work with as well. Now, if we scroll a little bit further on this website, we can see that in this case, we get some interactive GIF here that says, this is looking at the Star Wars API, and they're basically looking for a hero in the Star Wars universe. And in this case, they want the name. You then get the name. If you type in the height, you get also the height of the people and also the mass. Now, what that means is that you are not making any unnecessary calls to an API. With REST APIs, you're only limited to the data that you get back from the user. Now, this often means that you have to make multiple, what they call trips to the API. So you can say in this case, for example, you would get the name of the hero followed by the height. And then you can say in which movies does this particular hero star. So all of this takes place in one single request, which makes it really, really easy to work with. Now, you probably think, how can I work with this in Tableau? Now, first of all, you need to have Tableau Server or Tableau Online on version 2019.3 or later. And you need to be a server or site admin to be able to work with this API. Now, in this example, in this video, I'm going to look at Tableau Online. And I'm using my free developer site on Tableau Online. And the metadata API is by default enabled on Tableau Online. If you want to enable it on Tableau Server, what you need to do is, there is some information here. I think maybe it's on the getting started. Yeah, so you need to enable it for Tableau Server. So that means you need to run a TSM command, TSM maintenance metadata service enable. That will enable it for you. And then you can find that a link under the resources page in Tableau Server. And what this gives you is a thing called GraphQL. So it's not GraphQL, it's graphical. And graphical is an interface for you to write your queries to this API. Now, how we can actually access that in Tableau Online is by going to the URL. And in the URL, what we want to do is we want to remove the site name, and in this case, my development site. And I'm going to say metadata/graphical. And what that will do is it will send you to this particular interface. And this is the graphical interface for Tableau Metadata API. And what you'll see is if you start working with more GraphQL-based APIs is that you always get access to this type of interface. And this type of interface, what it has on the left-hand side, is where you can write your queries. On the right-hand side, you'll see a result. We also have on the top kind of an execution button. If you're familiar with Ultrix, then you know that you can just hit the run button and it will work. We also have a history button. So if I click on that, you can see some of the queries that I've run. And what is really good about Metadata API, but about any API that uses GraphQL, is that it has inbuilt documentation. So what we can see here, the root entry of this GraphQL API is called query. And within query, we can then fetch any of the kind of resources that are underneath this. So you can see this is a whole list. And what is really good is that the documentation is already in this graphical. That means that you can inspect the schema and how the API is structured. So let's first take a look at how to write a query. Now we start writing a query with typing in query, and you can see there's autocomplete here. And we then use these kind of curly braces, the mustachios. And then we, for example, want to find all the kind of Tableau users on the server. And what we want from them is their ID. Okay, so I'm here specifying, and let me make this a little bit bigger. There we go. Here we have the Tableau users and their ID. So if I now hit run, what I'll get is, as expected, a JSON response with the data, Tableau users, and then the ID. Now, because I'm using Tableau Online and I'm using my free developer account, which means that I have only one user here. But I specified to get back ID. So I'm getting back ID here. Now, if we do something similar, if I start looking for the Tableau user here, we can see what other properties or fields I can get back. Now, ID here has an exclamation mark, which means that it's, in this case, it's a unique identifier. And what I can do is, for example, I can say, actually, let's get the username as well. And if I then hit run again, you'll see that it now also gets the username. So that is my email address in this case. Now, if we look a little bit further, what we can see is, say, owned data sources. So what I could do is, for all of the users on the server, what I could see, I could go to my owned workbooks, owned data sources. So let's go to the workbooks actually. And then we need a curly brace again. And then we can say, give me the ID of the owned workbooks. Hit run, and you can see this is all the workbooks that this particular user owns. Now, if you had multiple users on the Tableau server, this would list out multiple users and multiple workbooks. You can then, of course, also get the name and also kind of the project in which they are based. So you can then see that I have a project called development, I have the default, and for example, this is a workbook that I have around my Google Analytics, which sits in my website project. Okay? So it's a really interesting way of getting data and understanding your Tableau server. Now, what we're writing here is query followed by all these kind of breakdown of the fields. And every time we run it, it runs this particular query. Now, what I'd like to do is actually specify some queries so we can have multiple listed here. So I'm just going to call this users and content. And what I can now also do is, for example, take a look at some other queries. So I can say, for example, query get workbooks. And what that means is now I can say get the ID, for the workbooks, I want the workbooks, then I want the idea and the name. So now if I click on the run button, or the execution button, I can select which query I want to run. So I can then say query get workbooks. And now I get all of the workbooks. Now I can also, for example, look for upstream or downstream data sources. In this case, I could say upstream data sources. And then I could get the idea and the actual name. So let's see if any of my workbooks, yeah. So here we can see I have a workbook, measles analysis workbook, which uses a data source called measles. Okay? So from the upstream data sources. Now, I could also go into all the fields that are within that particular data source. And then I can see name. And I can also, even if they've been referenced by calculations. So if I then hit run for get workbooks, you can see that now within this measles data source, I have year, column, row, week. Those are my actual fields in the data source. And now you can see if they have actually been referenced by calculations. Now here, for example, in the sample superstore, there is a profit field, which is being used in this particular calculation. Now let's take a look at that calculation. The actual name, and if we then hit run, scroll a little bit further, we can see that profit ratio is a calculation that uses profit. And I think if I go down to sales, exactly yet. This is also being referenced in there. So this is a great way to understand kind of the impact analysis. What is going to happen if I remove a field from a particular data source? Now you can do all kinds of things in here. We're now getting back all of the data. I could also put in some filters. So if I say, for example, here we have a workbook with this particular ID. If I grab that ID, and in here what I'm going to do is I'm going to say, let's filter. And I filter the ID, and the ID needs to be this one. Okay, so if I now run get workbooks, what you'll see is that it's only returning the data for this particular workbook. Okay? So what I would suggest doing as well is to go over this Explorer. You can find lots and lots of information here. And what you've seen is that you don't really need to understand, or you need to understand, of course, in this case, how Tableau works, but you can send queries and you can look for these. So what you can do is you can look for tables in data sources. You can even look for custom SQL. What that means is you can even check the custom SQL. Is it correct? And we've already looked at calculated fields, but you can do a lot more, like seeing if they've been using user filters. Now, all of this is available if you're a Tableau server admin or a site admin on Tableau Online, and it works from Tableau version 2019.3. What I am doing is I am using a free Tableau Online site, and you can also have your free Tableau Online site if you join the Tableau Developer Program. This is a free program and gives you lots and lots of free access to the Tableau developers. So first of all, you're being added to a Slack channel in which you can directly chat with them. You also get a free developer site, so that's this one. And you're being invited to monthly webinars where they share ideas and show examples of what's possible and what is coming with Tableau in the Tableau developer space. You can sign up by going to, and I should have opened this, but if you go to the Tableau Developer Program, it's at tableau.com/developer. And what you can then do is you can sign up here somewhere. Yeah, here, sign up, join now, and you will get access to it after probably a few minutes. Yeah, so hopefully you enjoyed this little introduction to the Tableau Metadata API, and I'll see you in the next video.